Welcome back to Experience Points, a less formal, more laid-back sort of video series where I talk about games that I've played a little bit of, but have not yet finished, and these are my first impressions of Arcadian Atlas, a brand new tactics RPG that was released on Steam just yesterday, if this review is coming out on Friday. First impressions so far are honestly really awesome, and I just wish that this was already on console, but I've been told by Serenity Forge that we can expect this to come out on consoles later this year, which is super important to me. And it's also going to be getting a final OST, which has me really excited, but you know what, we'll talk about that stuff here in a little bit. First, let's talk about some of the more obvious things. Right off the bat, this game is absolutely gorgeous. This has some incredible pixel art that I think kind of has this PS1 era look to it, maybe PSP, so people who are fans of maybe Final Fantasy Tactics, this might be up your alley. That said, I'm not really a big strategy RPG fan or tactics RPG person. I've played a handful of them, but I haven't played Final Fantasy Tactics. I haven't played Tactics Ogre. I've played the weird ones. I've played some really weird ones over the years. The controls, the layout, the game flow all feel pretty darn familiar so far. But as a newcomer to the game, I gotta say when I was playing on the standard difficulty, it really just felt pretty welcoming, honestly. It didn't feel too overwhelming for me, so I feel like this might be a really good stepping in point for some people who are looking at getting into some of these tactics games, but don't want to necessarily be completely wiped the floor with. This is probably a pretty good beginner's RPG based on my first 5 hours or so into it, which honestly isn't that deep into this game. I have a suspicion that this is going to be quite the RPG when it's all said and done. But getting back to those incredible looks here, I just love the pixel art. The characters are expressive and emotive, and honestly, it just completes this look. I'm not a huge fan of the art style of the character portraits, but they're inoffensive. You know, they're not bad. They don't contrast too greatly with the characters themselves. That said, the pixel art is also this isometric art style, which I love some isometric pixel art, and I think they did a really stellar job. So visually, yeah, this is pretty dang great. But I also wanted to talk about the audio side of things, which is where I feel like this game actually really starts to shine. It was already just pretty great as it is, but as a sucker for jazz and noir jazz in particular, that saxophone playing and kind of giving you that sense of intrigue, I honestly really love it. But it's not just jazz, although jazz is kind of the curveball that will first catch your attention when you're listening to this game. It has a wide breadth of different music styles within it. Sometimes it's, you know, a bit more piano when you're dealing with some more dramatic scenes. You know, I feel like it fits for the most part, and I'll be sprinkling in different tunes throughout today's review, so give it a listen for yourself. But honestly, I'm a sucker for jazz, so especially as a big fan of Breath of Fire 3 and its jazzy soundtrack, and Persona 5 and its very acid jazzy soundtrack, this feels right at home, and it feels really classy, which is one of the reasons I cannot wait to get my hands on that vinyl whenever I decide to finally stop messing around and bite the bullet. There's also, on the audio side of things, a really interesting approach that they've taken, kind of a more modern approach than what you might have heard in other RPGs from the PlayStation 1 or PSP. There are little audio cues and things, little subtle touches that just add so much little polish. There was a scene, this camera was slowly panning in on these characters who were talking about something. The girl he was talking to mentioned this thing that caught his eye, so he raised an eyebrow, and right then you hear this. You know, it was timed to the character animations, and I think that was such a solid choice that just elevates the game overall and makes this a musical experience in addition to just being a strategy RPG or tactics RPG. It has a little bit of whimsy to its presentation, and I really do appreciate that, especially because I tend to get a little bit lost with political intrigue, and this game has a bit of that, having these little chimes and things that keep my interest. Hey, this is a thing that happened. Be sure you remember that. I like it. There's no voice acting, but there is sort of voice acting. There's grunts and whispers and, you know, like, Stuff like that. It's fine. It sounds great. It's just, if you're not going to do voice acting, I prefer this over nothing, and I prefer it over the from like the text sprawl. So I think that this is a really solid choice, and it meshes really well with the overall presentation. So again, I'm really enjoying everything that this game has to offer so far, despite not really being a strategy or tactics RPG person myself. The story takes place in a pretty interesting land. It's full of political intrigue. The king has recently died, and there's some suspicions about who was responsible, and it's this really interesting setup where magic has been outlawed and people who can use magic are actually branded and then exiled, which is kind of interesting. And it's a little bizarre to me that you can actually still use some forms of magic in combat without being exiled. I don't know if that's just my misunderstanding of the universe so far, but it did kind of stand out as like that's weird. When you are visiting different taverns and things, you can actually listen in to various conversations and listen in on rumors and stuff, which is pretty nice if you just want to get a little bit of that extra lore. And personally speaking, as a story focused kind of player, I like the lore, and I did listen to all of them, but who knows how much of it stuck. There is a permadeath function where if a character falls in combat, and if you cannot finish that combat or maybe resurrect them within 3 turns, they are gone forever. And I don't have any resurrection spells. I don't know if you get any, honestly, or items. Yeah, that is a thing. If somebody falls in combat for 3 turns or longer, then they're just gone forever. You can try to finish the encounter within those turns. Otherwise, they're gone for good. If that happens to a storyline dependent character, though, it's just game over, which makes total sense, I think. So as a result of that, the characters that you start off with will probably eventually have to be replenished by recruiting new characters, who you can also customize with different equipment at towns and outfitters. You also gain levels after every encounter, so you don't really have to worry about who has which XP, and all the storyline dependent characters automatically gain levels every time. So to keep up with your strongest characters, which is really cool. So you don't really have to worry about micromanaging who's in which combat in order to make sure that they're ready for the next one. But honestly, I haven't had to do that yet because I've just been reloading every time that anybody dies, because whenever some character dies, it's usually because I'm up against the ropes and I'm about to lose anyway, so I just restart. That said, I have only died a handful of times over the course of my 5-hour playthrough, which is more than maybe a standard RPG, but there is a challenge there for newcomers to the strategy RPG scene or the tactics RPG genre, but it wasn't insurmountable. I will say that as a beginner's tip, I highly recommend that you check for new equipment after every story beat, every new cutscene that moves the story forward. Just pop on over to the outfitters and check for new equipment. I forgot to do that right after the first combat of the game, and I went straight into the next combat and got decimated. Upgrading your equipment, super necessary. Just a pro tip for anybody who, might be like me and forgets to do things like that from time to time. But otherwise, the difficulty was not bad, though I will also say there are easier and harder difficulties available for people who probably want more or less challenge depending on how much experience they have under their belts with this sort of game. The overall controls of the game are pretty intuitive, though I do have a minor gripe about how the game behaves with the D-pad on my controller. I don't know how pervasive this would be for other controllers of this type, but I noticed that whenever I'm navigating menus, it always feels like if I'm trying to be quick, I hit D-pad down a couple times and hit the A button, it might miss that second D-pad press. When you're in combat, you can't just sort of press and hold the D-pad currently to scroll across the map and survey the land. You gotta tap it several times in order to get to the other side of the screen. Overall, combat scenarios seem to be a little bit shorter than a lot of the ones that I would normally expect from a game of this sort of style. A lot of times in bigger, grand tactics RPGs, these sort of encounters can take hours. But I feel like every encounter that I've had so far has been more of like a 10 to 20 minute sort of encounter. Nothing has been really too crazy, honestly. But again, we're still in the early phases of the game, or at least I am. And I expect that scale will probably increase greatly as the number of people that I have available for these encounters increases from like 4 to 6 characters to maybe an upwards of 10 on either side of combat. So I wouldn't expect that to maintain the course. You know, I expect it will probably ramp up gradually as the story increases in scope and scale. But for now, things have been laying a lot of the groundwork for these smaller skirmishes, and I'm sure that they will increase in scale significantly from there. One of the other things that you can do inside of towns, inns, and taverns is acquiring contracts, which are kind of like the side quests of this game, optional encounters that you can perform in order to acquire money or special items, or also just extra levels before the next encounter. I would probably recommend that people looking for less of a challenge do all of these in order to make sure that all of your characters are as strong as they possibly can be. And also they have little tie-ins to lore and stuff that move the story forward a little bit, although they're not tied into the main storyline of the game at all. So if you're just wanting a little bit extra, obviously feel free to do them. But if you just want that extra challenge, go in at lower levels and, you know, experience the struggle for yourself, then I'm sure. I do sort of wish that more games would do the Shining Force thing and sort of allow exploration of towns and looking for items and going to shops inside of actual towns in outside of combat in these games. But honestly, Shining Force is kind of like the exception to the rule, I think, when it comes to that sort of exploration and world exploration mechanics of tactics RPGs. So obviously I can't hold that against this game, but part of me just has that in my wish list. But that would also probably really expand development time, and it's an indie studio, and honestly, what they've done has been stellar. I do have one other minor gripe to throw in here though, while I'm saying such nice things, and that's that it looks like this game does have some load screens, and they're usually pretty small, very short. I have an SSD, so it doesn't take long to load my contents, but what does bug me is having to push the start button after every load screen. It doesn't seem like that should be necessary, personally speaking. I think that they would do well to eliminate the need to press the start button from time to time. But all in all, those are very small gripes for a game that I've really been enjoying so far. And like I said, it's getting a physical release, and it's coming to consoles later this year, and it's getting a vinyl soundtrack. And I'm sure by now you've already heard that this game has some really incredible music. I've been playing a lot of the tunes from my playthrough in the background today, and I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have. But that about does it for today. What do you think of Arcadian Atlas? Is this on your Steam wishlist? And are you looking forward to picking it up on console later on this year? Or are you also interested in that vinyl? Anyways, that's about it from me today. I will see you guys in the next video. Have a great week, everybody.